Good morning, Shadydale Church of God. I trust everyone is doing well today. Today's lesson is February 18, 2024, week 12, Faith During Times of Trouble. Let's take a look at what our study is about today. At times, we endure a political climate in which the laws are in conflict with our personal convictions. Because of his faith, in God, Daniel stood up to King Darius' unjust decree, even at the risk of his own life. Our Bible passage will be found in Daniel chapters 6, verses 10, 11, 14, 15, 14, 16, 19 through 23, and verse 26. Okay, so let's take a look at our Bible background right quick. It says, after the Jews' exile returned to Judah following their Babylonian captivity, they eventually fell under the rule of Antiochus the fourth, Ephanes, who reigned from 175 to 163 BC. Okay. Um, Antiochus initiated harsh measures to repress the practice of the Jewish faith. Okay. Um, the stories found in the book of Daniel would have encouraged Jewish freedom fighters during the Maccabean revolt that followed Antiochus' action. We can imagine Jewish parents telling their parents about Daniel, a righteous and innocent man whose only crime was to pray to the living God of Israel. Such stories sustained the Jewish people as they worshiped and placed their hopes in the God who had protected Daniel from the lion's den. Okay, so most of us are very familiar with the story of Daniel in the lion's den and what happened. And this Sunday school lesson is going to get into some of the details of that. It may share a few details that you may or may not remember or have heard, but in general, I know it's not new information for us. Okay, but the thing I will say is this, and I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, is sometimes, even though we're doing right, because we're doing right, there are going to be people that are jealous. In today's society, we would call them haters. Okay, and um, and because they can't get us for doing wrong, sometimes they'll try to trick us or come up with something to get us and change something that was right to wrong to make it look wrong. Okay, so what am I saying? On your job, be faithful to God. In your home, be faithful to God. In your day-to-day living, be faithful to God. And there will be haters. There will be people that will not like what you do. They will not like you. They will be haters, if you will. But we are to keep on trusting and believing in God, even in the face of death. If it comes to death, if it comes to going to prison, if it comes to being kicked out of your home, losing your job, have faith in God over all other things. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get into our Bible lesson. And we're going to have Bible Gateway help us out with the reading. Okay. And so we're going to start off with Daniel chapter 6, verses 10 and 11.
Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help.
Okay. Exiled to Babylon, Daniel remained faithful to the Lord God in spite of the social and political pressures he faced. Because the wisdom of God had given Daniel, he was appointed as an administrator over other leaders who became jealous and determined to lay a trap for him. They convinced the king to issue a edict that people could pray only to the king for the next 30 days. The only penalty on penalty of death by being thrown into the den of lions. It appeared that Daniel already had a well established practice of praying that he did not cease even when he learned about the king. The king's decree facing towards Jerusalem to pray. See First King 1, see First Kings 8 and 48. Daniel was in his own room, and he was not making a um, pretentious show of his prayer, but he was near the open window. So he was not hiding his actions either. Daniel persisted to get down on his knees and pray, giving thanks to God, even though he was putting his life in danger. The plotters who laid the trap for Daniel got their wish. These men saw him praying to God for help, perhaps specifying regarding the king's declaration. They went to the king and presented their case against Daniel, verses 12 and 13. So let me share a little bit more background on this. Um, as the lesson just stated, Daniel, because of the favor God showed Daniel, he was made leaders of leaders. He was made a leader of leaders. Okay. And a lot of leaders didn't like that. They were jealous, they were envious, they were haters, if you will. And so they initially said, okay, let's find Daniel doing something wrong. We'll report it to the king, and then the king will take him out of his position. They couldn't find nothing wrong. They met together and they said, guys, we can't find nothing wrong with Daniel. So we got to come up with something that he does and use it against him. They knew that Daniel prayed every day to God 3 times a day, and he would do it in plain sight. He would go to his window that faced Jerusalem, and he would pray every day, 3 times a day. And so they decided to lay a trap. And they did it in a slick way so the king didn't understand what was happening. They went to the king and said, "Oh, king, okay, uh, live forever." They kind of boosted him up a little bit. Say, "Hey, look, we want you to make a decree or edict saying that for the next 30 days, everybody has to pray to you. If anybody is caught praying to anybody else, they're gonna get thrown in the lion's den. And King, we're gonna make it official. Okay, you're gonna sign this piece of paper. You're gonna put your stamp on it. You're gonna put your ring on it, and it's gonna be law that once it goes in the law, nothing can change it. Once it goes in the law, you can't change your mind. You can't back up. Nobody can overrule it." And the king was like, "Okay, why? No problem, fine." The king wasn't thinking about Daniel. He was just thinking about what these leaders had told him, boasting him up, and he's like, "Hey, look, yeah, make me feel good." And so that's what happened. So Daniel found out about it. Once he found out about it, he's like, "I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to continue to pray to God the exact same way." Now, a lot of folks today would be like, "Ain't no sense in dying for this. I won't stop praying. I just won't go to the window and pray. Or I'll pray at the window at nighttime." Or something they would have tried to do to not let themselves be seen, to um, not get thrown in the lion's den. Okay. But Daniel was faithful. He was a true believer. He believed more in God than he did man. He said, I don't, fear what you can do to the body. I fear what God can do to my soul. So he prayed. And so the three men, they was like, aha, look at him. There he is in the window praying again. We caught him. He fell into our trap. He didn't know we was tricking him. Now we're going to get him. Right? And so he went to the king. They went to the king and reported him to the king. And they told the king, oh, king, we got one for you. Daniel done fell short. Okay. And so when the king heard about it, okay, we're going to get into the next part here. So now, this is verse 15, 14, 16, and 19. If you will please bear with me, we're going to go ahead and read 14 through 19. Okay. So all of no, we're gonna read 14 and 15 and then 19. Okay, let's read 14 and 15.
So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree.
I'm sorry. Here you go, right here. 14.
When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguish.
Okay. So we did read 14 through 19. Okay. Even though the lesson only calls for 14, 16, and 19. Okay. We just got a little bit more background. All right. So when the king heard what Daniel had done, he was greatly displeased, not because his order had been defiled, but because he liked Daniel. The king spent the day thinking and consulting, making every effort to save Daniel from being executed. But Daniel uh, directors about to weren't about to let this slide. They reminded the king that the decree was binding in verse 15. Even though the king genuinely admired and respected Daniel and attempted to avoid following through on his own decree, he apparently had no recourse. He gave the order for his men to throw Daniel into the lion's den. Though unable to save Daniel, King Darius expressed a hope that Daniel's God would rescue him. Here and throughout the story, Daniel saw God. Here and throughout the story, Daniel saw God as Daniel's God, not as his own God. Daniel spent the night in the day in the dark with lions around him, and the king spent the night filled with remorse and grief. Verse 17 and 18. At the first light of day, Darius went back to the lion's den. This says something about the king's regard and concern for Daniel. Okay. So here we are where Daniel prayed anyway, like he was like he normally did, thrown into the lion's den because the king could not go back on his word. Once he figured out the guys had tricked him, he wanted to go back. He consulted, he tried, but there was nothing he could do. If the king tried to, then he could actually get overruled and then he could get punished. And I believe it could have even been death to him. So he was not able to protect Daniel. He was not able to save Daniel from the trickery that was done. But the one thing the king said, Daniel, and I'm gonna put this in my own words. Daniel, I can't save you, bro. I tried, but I couldn't do it. But the God that you serve, Daniel, your God, I hope he can save you. Pray to your God to save you. Daniel, I don't want to see you die. If you really serve the real God, ask him to save you. In my own words, that's what he said. But we know we read the scripture. That ain't quite the way he said it. That's not quite the way he said it. But in my own words, he was pleading. He was sorry. He did not want that to happen, but it did. And so at that point, there was nothing he could do. So Daniel got tossed into the lion's den. Daniel was calm. Daniel was relaxed. Daniel was chilling, right? The king was nervous. The king was upset. The king could not sleep, pacing back and forth, right? And so, first light of day, first light of day, the king runs to the lion's den. I got to see what happened to Daniel. So let's take a look at verse 20. 20, 21, 22, 23. We're going to go ahead and read 24, 25, and 26 as well.
When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed, and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end.
All right. So, here to read this. When Darius got near to the den, he was hesitant. Had Daniel's God been able to rescue him from the lions? The response Daniel gave to the king's inquiry was a traditional greeting addressed to rulers of that time and through many centuries. May the king live forever. It is somewhat ironic that Daniel expressed words supporting the positive welfare of the king even though Darius had essentially sentenced Daniel to death. Then again, the verbal attack of the king might well have resulted in a longer stay in the big hungry cats. Daniel stated that his faithfulness to God had been rewarded. God had rescued him by sending an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. To Daniel, this miracle proved that he was innocent in God's sight and also served as evidence of his innocence before King Darius. The evening before, Daniel had gone to his palace in distress, but now he was overjoyed that Daniel had not died. And Daniel, brought out of the lion's den, and closer inspection then revealed that there was not even the smallest wound or scratch from the lions. It was clear that Daniel had been saved because he had trusted in his God. Darius yet issued another decree, this time calling all the people of his empire to fear and reverence the God of Daniel, even in private. Daniel refused to compromise his faith and spiritual practices. His willingness to face death led to the nationwide proclamation that is God is the living God and he endures forever. Oftentimes, we don't know how God will pull us through. We don't know if God will pull us through. We have a hope and a prayer. We have faith and we have belief. That's enough. As long as we have faith, as long as we believe, as long as we can call on the living God, all is not lost. We have an opportunity, we have a chance to be rescued, to be saved, to be pulled out of whatever the situation is. Daniel stood fast. He knew the people tried to trick him. He knew that they were trying to get him killed. He knew what they were doing, but that didn't stop him from doing what he was supposed to do. Instead of Daniel trying to work it out, instead of Daniel trying to figure out how to get out of this, God had already worked it out for him to be able to get out. And God was magnified, God was glorified through it. And so that gave Daniel even more favor with God. Okay. And so we never know how God wants to use us. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, saints and friends, allow God to use you. Have faith in God, trust in God, and know that he will pull you through. Your enemies will be used as footstools. And in this case, where the lions, they were unable to eat Daniel, but because the lions were obedient to God, oh boy, they feasted. The three men, their wives, and their children all got thrown into the lion's den. And before they could hit the ground, them lions was jumping up, clawing, biting, chewing, scratching, had them a good old meal, right? And so trust in the Lord in all your ways, lean not on your own understanding, and he will direct your path. Thank you very much for joining me. I love you. There ain't nothing you can do about it, and we will see you in 2 weeks. God bless.